Welcome back, everybody. I hope you're all doing fine. Today I'm going to start something new. I call it a series of culture shocks. I was inspired to this series by a number of Americans who lived for a number of years or still live in Germany and have experienced culture shocks in that context, and also by a number of Germans who have lived here in the United States and have gone through similar things that I have. You can find many of them on YouTube. In particular, the two websites that I'm showing here have been an inspiration to me, but there are many others like them. Now, before we start, I need to show you where I am from exactly to give you a little bit of context. Here's a Google map of Europe, Germany right here, and as we zoom in, Frankfurt, this is north west of it, where I grew up. We zoom in a little bit more. Here is Bad Camberg. Actually, when I grew up, it wasn't Bad yet, it was only Camberg. And this is the area where I'm from. Let's switch to the satellite view. And in particular, in the middle of that town, there is a vacation resort here where I spent the first 10, 11 years of my life, and then we moved up here to a monastery, an old monastery at the top of a hill near a chapel, and that's where we lived for roughly 5 years. So by the time I was 15, I had gone through a major phase of socializations. Now, if you look at what you are seeing here already, it is very typical for Germany. You see all these paths and ways and hiking paths, railways and so forth, crisscrossing the agricultural area as well as the forests. And this is very typical for Germany because all these access pathways that the farmers have to their fields are actually used by people for hiking, for walking. You're not allowed to go there with your car, of course. It's only for agricultural and forestry machinery. But people use it, even though it's private property. People use it to People use it to go on walks. And the same is true for forested areas, as you can see here. Some forests are public, others are privately owned, but a common feature of all of them is that they are crisscrossed by a dense network of hiking paths, and most of them are signposted, so they are actually organized in certain looping hike paths that you can do. It tells you on maps or even on the trail how many hours that path takes and what distance you would be walking, and they're all signposted, and that crisscrosses actually through the entire country. No matter where you zoom in, you see the same pattern as you close in. There we have the same thing. Or we go further north to Germany, you do the same here. You see the same pattern appear here. You can do the same thing going to the very south. Austria, cultural sphere is very German too. Oh, Google Map hasn't done that actually. Look at this. I would have to switch to a different map. There's a website, GPS Wanderatlas. It's a hiking atlas, and I have here starting point where I grew up, but come back. You can see here all the paths again through the forest, through the agricultural land, and actually here the actual signposting as you would find them in the forests is actually explained, what it is called, what the distance is. This one is just 4 kilometers, and it takes you a little bit over an hour, and it even tells you what the condition is of the trail, good, and how effortsome it is to walk it, and there's just a medium difficulty here, and you find them pretty much everywhere in Germany where you go. You can zoom out here and go someplace else down in the south and do the same here. You find the very same pattern here, and you can show you in Austria it's pretty much the same thing. As you can see, it's very touristy, and therefore there are a lot of hiking paths there too, crisscrossing the area. You can see it now here. They are all all drawn in. Actually, it extends into Switzerland, a lot of southern Tyrol, which used to be Austrian and which is now Italian, but it is still culturally very, very German. You'll find the same pattern of hiking trails all over the place. Now, I mentioned that because the Germans actually use these trails. They are literally thousands and thousands of miles of these trails, and they are being used regularly because Germans go on walks regularly and they hike regularly. In fact, sometimes they flock in masses to the countryside and to the woods, in particular during weekends, of course. And we have one particular day that is Volkswandertag, that's the People's Hiking Day that coincides with the Labor Day in Germany, which is the 1st of May. And on those days, there are a lot of organized walks, but also just in general, people just go out and walk and hike. And my parents did that to me when I was very little already. You see here a few photos that I've grabbed from my photo album of my childhood. And in this first one, you see me actually walking up the highest mountain of the Taunus Mountains. Again, to give you an orientation, here is a Google map. There's Frankfurt, Bad Camberg, where I grew up. And we switch over to the map, the satellite map, and you can see here Großer Feldberg. That's the tall Feldberg Mountain, Frankfurt, and this is the area we used to go hiking already as little kids. And you see a dense network of hiking paths. Now here's another picture from my photo album on the left when I reached the peak of that mountain at age 4. It was in 1968. And on the right is a picture that I found online on a website that is dedicated to that mountain, which shows pretty much the same path coming up, where the trees have gone a little bit bigger and fatter. So they are, of course, 50 years older now. And now is another set of pictures here. On the right side is a cliff that I climbed up as a boy. On the left side, on that same website, a picture showing those cliffs today. Now add to all this the fact that in German towns and cities and villages, by law, every street and road inside of that town or village has to have sidewalks on either side of the road. So in other words, Germany is perfectly geared toward pedestrians. You can walk safely through every town on every side of the road, and once a road ends, it's not the end of the world. You have access paths and trails going into the woods, going into agricultural areas, and so everything is accessible. And 30% roughly of Germany is actually forested land, but only a minority of it is actually a pure protected area that is wilderness. Most of the forests in Germany are maintained and cultivated and are accessible with these dense networks. So my way of being socialized is that once I feel like I'm under stress, I'm under pressure, I need relief, I need to relax, I go out. I go out into nature. I go out into where it's green, where there is the gurgling of creeks, the chirping of crickets, and the singing of birds. And whether it's with friends, with family, or all by myself, any time of the day, any day of the week, I have been going on hikes, shorter, longer, or even on longer hikes during vacation, actually. Getting a backpack and into the countryside on bicycle or on foot, hiking, sleeping in tents in the wilderness. As a matter of fact, when I was a child, there were two places where I was. I was in school and at home, inside, in houses. And whenever I had spare time and weather allowed it, I was outside and I was in the trees. I was climbing. Because the vacation resort, the first 11 years of my life where we were, we had a little forest in there, and I was just conquering all the trees there. I had to climb them. And later on, we were up at that chapel. There were forests there nearby, and my brother and I would just always go into the forest and climb. So that is how I grew up. Now, things change radically the minute I come to America. I remember staying at a friend in Alabama, down in Huntsville, Alabama, or near Huntsville, and I get bored. I don't know what to do with myself because initially immigration is a little bit difficult and my life is disorganized and I can't really work. I'm actually self-employed as a publisher, but my stuff isn't really all together yet after I'd come to the United States. So there is some lag, and how I want to cope with it is as I'm used to going out in nature. So I'll go to the end of the road on which my friend lives and expect, as I would from Germany, at the end of the asphalted road to some trail to start, going into fields, going into woods, whatever. But no, nothing. The road ends, the world ends. And beyond that comes wilderness. No, I tried to walk in there and I got in thickets and thorns. It was so awful I had to backtrack. So it wasn't working. I tried several paths. It was just pretty much impossible. Eventually I found an area where it was a little bit more accessible, not so overgrown with shrubbery. But it turned out, sooner or later, I ran across a sign that I have never seen anything similar in Germany. Posted, "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Whoa. That was actually an area evidently owned by some person that was neglected. There was an old wooden shack that was falling apart, but other than that, nobody was living there. It was just a forested area with a little bit of lawn and meadow, and a creek flowing through, and actually in an area of the forest flowers were growing and turning it into a violet carpet. It looked really beautiful. But the sign said I'm not allowed to be there. That was a first impression, a disappointing one. And as I have lived in many areas in the United States and got to know how things are in this country, the contrast is staggering and could not be any more extreme in my feeling. In this country, unless you are in downtown of older villages, towns and cities, mostly on the East Coast, sidewalks don't exist. You have here in our town, it's a pretty old town of 1888, I think, that is relatively old for the United States. And downtown we have sidewalks, but as soon as you get into a little bit of the outside areas, they stop. So any new development, there are none. And the more you go west into the countries, newer cities and towns, you sometimes have no sidewalks at all because it is expected that nobody walks anyhow. It's a contrast if you go into a European city or town, and particularly in Germany, you see people walking everywhere. And you see that people are actually alive. And you go into this country, and if you were to take the same measure of the amount of people walking through and milling through the streets of a city or a town as a measure of how lively a city or a town is, then you would say these towns here are all dead. There's no one out because everybody is either boxed up in a house or boxed up in a car, and pretty much nobody walks. If you see somebody walking along the road, in particular along some major road that doesn't even have a sidewalk going from one shop to another, it looks weird. So why is that guy walking here? He's not supposed to be doing this. Doesn't he have a car? Can't he afford one? There's something wrong with him. Something like that would never happen in Germany because, first of all, there are sidewalks everywhere. People are walking and it's normal, and that just doesn't happen. The next thing I remember was a similar culture shock. As I was in Cincinnati living for a short while with friends, and they said we're going to a park. So we drove to the park, and then we drove into the park and through the park to a parking lot in the middle of the park, and there we stopped, and then we were there. And this concept is just wrong from my point of view, from a German point of view. You drive to a park, leave the car outside on a parking lot, and then you walk in the park. A park is not for cars. but not in this country. Here in this country, everything is for cars. As a matter of fact, I will go so far as to say this country was built for cars and not for people. And what I mean by that is, as I already mentioned, if you're out there walking, it can be dangerous. There are areas where there are simply no sidewalks, where there are no crossings. If you have a strip mall on the left side and the right side of a major road, there is no way of getting from one side to the other unless you risk your life getting run over. You better go by car. Even though it's walkable, there's no reason to waste gas on this, but it's unsafe. And that's just never happened in Germany. The same with crossings in general. You have the zebra crossings, the stripes across the road, and in Germany they have additional signs, and some of them are actually flashing. And it is not only against the law not to stop for pedestrians there, but it is actually enforced. The same law exists here in the United States, but as a pedestrian, you better don't assume that any car ever stops at a zebra crossing, because they'll run you over. Because this country is for cars and not for people. I say, what is the national flower of the United States? Of course, there is no such thing, but if there were one, it would be the carnation. Here in this area, if I want to go on a walk, an extended walk, on a hike, just for an hour or so to relax in nature, I have to drive 7 miles. In Germany, I would just get out and walk. Anywhere, edge of town, would give me that opportunity. And this major coping mechanism that I developed, grew up with, it is so important for me to find relief, peace, and ease of mind in nature, in the woods, is something that I'm struggling with. On that note, because it's a little bit depressing, I want to lighten it up a little bit and tell a story of the extraordinary nature of my intensity of connection that I feel with activity in nature. I will not claim that it is every German does that, particularly these days when the whole globe has become internet locked. So a lot of things happen virtually, not in the real world anymore. And particularly post-COVID, it has hit a lot of people, and particularly the younger generations. More people staying indoors and get less outside into nature. I think it's unfortunately a global epidemic. Anyway, I mentioned that, to come to the a little bit of funny side of things, mentioned that the first 15 years I grew up in the Taunus area in Bad Camberg, and very much in nature, and I lived a good part of my life in the trees and the woods. Now at age 15, my parents moved away from there. They moved to Remscheid, which is a city in northwest of Cologne, no, northeast of Cologne, sorry. I actually spent the last 3 years of high school there. And initially we lived actually kind of in a central part of that city where there was no immediate access to any wooded area, to trees. Actually, the immediate area, there were no trees at all. We had to walk quite a distance to get to the first tree. The result of that was that my brother and I started climbing houses. I can't wrap my head around that anymore today, but that's actually what we did. We were so desperate to climb that we were just climbing up houses. Lightning rods and water spouts were good enough for us to get up on any house, up to the roof, climb up on the roof. I remember one day, it was winter, there was snow on the roof, and it was a slate roof. Imagine a relatively steep slate roof with snow on it. Extremely dangerous. We went up there, we climbed up all the way up to the top of the roof, used the snow to make snowballs, and threw them down on the passing traffic. All right. some cars driving by called the police, and the police showed up, and we were in trouble. We were 15, 16 at that point. No, 14, 15. So my brother's younger than I am. So it has toned down over years. It's not that extreme anymore, but it shows you where I'm coming from. It's not average. So it is, as I was told, intense. No matter what I do, it's all intense. And this being in nature, experiencing nature, and being in the woods was a very intense activity too, which is not normal. So I'm not raising that up to a standard that Germans live up to. I'm talking about myself and my own experience. Now, coming back to America, the experience I've had here, and I cannot say right now whether it is a similar development in Germany, is that nowadays, it must have been different 100 and 200 years ago when people were very much close to nature, but nowadays, it seems to me that there are two worlds. There's us and nature. And in America, people try to shut out nature and exclude it, and allow it only in a very organized and defined manner. So we live in houses, climate controlled, at home, at work, when we go shopping. And when we transit from one place to another, we go into another rolling box that is also air conditioned and shut out anything that is coming potentially from outside again. And the typical American lawn has no weeds and no flowers in it. We have lawn maintenance companies coming, they want to do our lawn. They always say, oh, we can turn that into a real lawn that has only grass in it. It looks so. I think if I have dandelions and all kinds of beautiful, colorful flowers in it and also some weeds, it's not only more beautiful in my eyes, but it's of course, ecologically speaking, biologically speaking, much more healthy. A lot of insects can live in there that in a simple grass lawn can't live, and we have a broad variety of insects. Bats and birds can live. So it all builds up on each other, and I cannot wrap my head around the attitude of turning a yard into a showpiece of monoculture, of boring grass, monoculture plus a few trees here and there, and have to be manicured just the same. Not my thing. So Germans are very much ecologically minded, have been for a very long time. I'm not saying they're perfect in this regard. There are other countries that are ahead of Germany, like all the Scandinavian countries. I think they're ahead of Germany. But compared to America, where the connection to nature is missing, and the damage we are doing in this country, in America, is not being perceived because we are not a part of nature. We don't see it, we don't experience it, and we can just brush it off or forget it because it's not on our horizon. And I think this is sad. If we were to live more in nature, we're more out there, we're a part of it. We are a part of it. We act like we are not. There's nature and there's us. No, we are a part of it. And if we detach ourselves from that, we do harm to ourselves. And I think the coping mechanism that I've been talking about, stress release and of soothing your mind in nature. Green is the color of soothing, of peace. And that is nature. That is trees, shrubs, grass, any kind of plants. And you have the chirping of insects, and of course you have a mosquito once in a while, but that's nature. You have the chirping of the birds, the gargling of creeks. It can be therapeutic on a massive scale for everyone, for a nation, to have this connection to nature and to have this access to nature therapy. That would do a lot of people a lot of good. Knowing how I have reacted, being cut off from it to some degree, how I struggle with stress relief, how I sometimes just feel boxed in and cut off from life. From it's gotten, of course, worse with all the shutdowns and COVID and everything going online. I've always been, in my professional life, been doing things online because that was just the only way to operate for me since the mid-1990s. But now everything's kind of going this way. So we're cutting ourselves off not only from nature, but now also from natural interactions with people. So things are getting worse. And America originally comes from a very nature-bound world. In the 1800s, in the frontier days of this nation, almost everybody, except for the people, and there was a minority back then living in cities, everyone was in nature, living in nature, from nature, with nature, and was very much bound to nature and feeling with nature and a part of it. And we've lost that as a nation. I think that does tremendous harm to our minds, to our souls, to our economy, to our nature, and it hits us back with the economy too. So that wraps it up. It's not a positive note at the end. Not everything is positive, fortunately. That is my contribution to that culture shock that, although I've been here in this country now since 2011, I've been here earlier already for 6 years, between 1999 and 2005, but this is my second stint here. So I've been here for 11 years now. And this is something I cannot and do not want to get used to. So I'm keep looking for my attachment, reattachment to nature over and over again. And I will not stop doing this as long as I can. All right, it's gotten late this afternoon, time to wrap up. If you have anything critical, supportive, or additional to remark about what I've said here, feel free to leave your comments down below. And if you want to get in touch personally, you can go to my website, gammarudolph.com, and get in touch there. So this is the first of a series of videos I plan on doing. The next one is probably going to be about trash, garbage, and it's going to be hopefully much shorter than this one. I have other topics listed, but I'm not sure which sequence I'm going to make them in, and we'll see how it all goes. Thank you all for watching, and I hope I see you again next time.